The first time my parents looked at my report card like it was cursed. It was a Thursday, so humid the hallway tiles sweated. Dad had come home early because his motorbike coughed and died 2 blocks from our apartment, and Mom was still wearing last night's glitter. Stars stuck to her cheekbones as if the sky had tried to claim her and failed. I heard paper flutter in the living room, then Dad's voice. Slow and careful, like he was reading an obituary. "Junie," he said, "you're in 6th grade. I stepped out of my room with my backpack still on, because I'd just returned from my group study session, even though it was technically a half day. "Yes," I said. Dad frowned at the printed line that said perfect attendance, then at me, then at the ceiling as if answers might be hiding in the peeling paint. "And you've never skipped class," he said, the way someone might say, "and you've never been struck by lightning." Mom leaned over his shoulder, her long nails tapping the table. "Look," she said, pulling out a stack of certificates she'd discovered while accidentally cleaning my room. Academic excellence, mathematics merit, outstanding moral character. She said those last words as if she'd tasted something bitter. Dad swallowed. "This is suspicious," he decided. It wasn't the first time my parents had been suspicious of me, but it was the first time they'd been suspicious because I was doing well. Most families I knew worried when their kid failed a test. Mine worried when I got full marks. If you met my parents before you met me, you would expect their child to be a minor disaster with a charming smile. That was the legend of Kai-Tran and Mila, the couple who could turn a calm night into a story. The 2 people, the neighborhood aunties warned their children about, and the neighborhood teenagers secretly admired. Dad used to race motorcycles out past the last good streetlights, where the road becomes a ribbon and your heart becomes a drum. Mom used to dance in a club where the bass was strong enough to rattle your ribs and make you feel, for a minute, that your body belonged to music instead of gravity. These days, Dad fixed fans, delivered parcels, installed cheap ceiling lights, anything that paid cash before the sun went down. Mom live-streamed from borrowed corners of the internet, selling a performance made of jokes, songs, and a smile that didn't always reach her eyes. They were still loud in the way they walked, still fearless in the way they argued, still allergic to routine. And then there was me, Junie Tran, small and careful, the kid who returned library books on time and did homework for fun. I liked schedules. I liked clean margins. I liked the satisfying click of a pen cap. I liked the feeling of understanding something that used to confuse me. I liked school because it was a world with rules that, if followed, usually made sense. My parents didn't dislike me. They just didn't know what to do with me. I was like a plant they hadn't meant to buy, growing steadily in the corner while they were busy chasing storms. On that Thursday, they held an emergency meeting at our wobbly coffee table. Dad sat on the sofa, legs spread, elbows on knees, face serious like he was about to negotiate with the police. Mom perched on the armrest, eyeliner sharp as a blade. They didn't invite me, but they didn't close their mouths either, so I listened from my doorway. "A normal kid skips school at least once," Dad argued. "A normal kid lies," Mom added. "A normal kid has at least one secret crush," Dad said, as if he'd read it in a manual titled, "How to Raise a Human." Mom sighed. "When I was her age, my diary was full of boys' names. Hers is full of lesson plans." Dad flipped my certificate over and over like he hoped a hidden message would appear. "Maybe she's sick," he whispered. "Maybe she caught a disease called responsibility." Mom slapped the table. "We have to fix it," she announced. "We can't let our child become one of those terrifying kids who say, 'Good morning, teacher,' too loudly." Dad nodded, face pale. "The kind who reminds teachers about homework," he agreed, horrified. Thus began what they called the Rehabilitation Project, which is a dramatic name for parents trying to teach their kid to misbehave. The next morning, Friday, I stepped out with my backpack. Dad's voice snapped awake behind me. "Where are you going?" "To school," I said. He squinted as if I'd told him I was joining a monastery. "On purpose? It's a school day," I reminded him. "And I have a group review session for finals." Mom emerged from the bedroom wearing a robe printed with cartoon dragons. She looked at the clock, then at me, then at Dad. "Stop her," she commanded. Dad raised a hand like a traffic cop. "No school today," he declared. "We're taking you out." My heart did a tiny leap. I didn't let it show. "Out?" I repeated. Mom shoved a folded bill into my palm. "We're going to teach you how to live," she said. "What have I been doing?" I asked, sincerely curious. "Surviving. Dad said. Today you'll start thriving. They dragged me into the city at noon, when the sun sat directly above us like an angry supervisor. Mom marched us into a hair salon that smelled of hairspray and chemical dreams. The owner greeted her like a returning celebrity. "My, new color already?" "Not me," Mom said, pushing me forward. "Her." The owner looked at my neat braid and my school uniform skirt and frowned. "She's young." "She's dangerous," Mom replied. "Fix her." He offered me a menu of wild colors: ocean blue, fire orange, purple like bruises. Mom pointed to a bright, rebellious red. Dad grinned like he'd chosen a weapon. I studied the color chart thoughtfully. "I'd like black," I said. Mom blinked. "Black? It's a deep color," I explained. "Mysterious, full of despair." Dad's mouth opened in proud surprise. "See?" he whispered to Mom. "She's got it in her." Half an hour later, I walked out with glossy black hair that looked exactly like my original hair, only healthier. Mom stared at me like she'd been cheated. Dad tried not to laugh and failed. "Okay," Mom said, regrouping. Plan B. Plan B was a piercing kiosk in the mall. The teenager behind the counter looked at my school uniform, and then at my parents' eager faces, and then said, "No." Plan C was a tattoo shop down an alley that Dad claimed was artistic, and Mom claimed was educational. The tattoo artist took one look at my face and shook his head like he'd been asked to sign a confession. "I'm not making a child's report card worse," he said. "Go buy stickers." So we bought temporary tattoos from a market stall. Tiny stars, little snakes, motivational phrases like, "Be brave." Mom stuck a star on my wrist and declared me halfway saved. Then they took me to their true temple, an arcade. Neon lights flashed like restless spirits. Machines screamed with music and victory. Dad cracked his knuckles. Mom tied her hair into a high ponytail like she was about to duel. "We'll show you real games," Dad said. "Then you choose what corrupts you best." Dad played a racing game with such focus you would think he was saving the world. Mom played a rhythm game, feet tapping, hands flying, eyes fierce. They shouted at the screen and at each other. "You missed the drift," Dad accused. "You can't feel the beat," Mom shot back. Their laughter bounced off the plastic seats. They turned to me, breathing hard. "Well?" Mom demanded. "Which one?" I slid into the empty seat beside them, pulled out my USB drive, and opened the computer connected to a neglected printing station. The arcade had a business corner for parents who waited while their children spent money, and no one ever used it. "I'll play this," I said. Dad leaned over. "What is that?" "Typing practice," I said. "The keyboard is smoother than the one at school." Mom stared as I opened a slideshow program and began designing animated flashcards for our final exam review. I added transitions. I made letters float in like ghosts. I created a timed quiz. The screen became a tiny classroom of my own. Dad and Mom watched, silent, the way people watch someone speak to an animal they've never seen before. "This," Dad said finally, voice small, "is worse than math." "I told you," Mom whispered, horrified. "She's possessed." On the walk home, I felt a strange warmth in my chest. They had spent hours next to me, even if they didn't understand what I was doing. For my whole life, my room had been my private planet. They rarely entered. They rarely asked. But today they had orbited around me for an entire afternoon. Then my stomach cramped, low and sharp. I stopped mid-step, hand pressing my belly. "I need to go home," I said. Mom's eyes flicked over my face. "Period?" she guessed, casual but careful. I nodded. Mom made a decision with a click of her tongue. She led us not home, but to a narrow pastry shop with a crooked wooden sign and an old man dozing behind the counter. In the window were trays of brown sugar date cakes, glistening like sweet bricks. Dad pointed. "Those," he said, "good for cramps." Mom leaned closer to me. "Also good for making you think your parents are not useless," she murmured. Dad told me, in a voice too casual to be fully honest, that when he was my age, he had stolen those exact cakes because he and Mom had been hungry enough to see the world in bite-sized pieces. He said the owner had a limp, so it had been easy. He said he'd been caught later and had been beaten, and yet he'd returned anyway because hunger doesn't care about dignity. Mom nodded, eyes on the cakes. "We were broke," she said. "We were loud because it was cheaper than being scared." She shoved money into my hand. "Buy what you want," she said, then added, "and don't steal. We're older now." Inside, the old man woke long enough to take my money. His eyes sharpened when he saw my parents through the window. "They came back," he murmured. "The ones who stole but also kept the shop lively." I bought 2 date cakes and, without thinking too hard, a deposit slip for a small birthday cake I'd been dreaming about. When I came back outside, Mom's eyebrows rose. Dad pretended to be offended. "Birthday cake?" Mom asked. "My birthday is next week," I said, as if it were common knowledge. Dad coughed. "Right," he said, sounding startled by the concept of time. At home that night, they tried to pretend my birthday was not a serious event. They brought home crab Dad had gotten from a wealthy client who liked to show off, and we sat around the table cracking shells while the ceiling fan clicked like a metronome. Halfway through dinner, Mom asked, "What day is your birthday again?" "Next Friday," I said. Dad nodded too quickly. "Will, remember," he promised. "I want to invite my classmates," I added. "A small party." Mom waved a hand like she was swatting away a fly. "Kids don't want parties with their parents," she declared. Dad agreed, relieved. When I was a kid, the best birthday was when the adults weren't home. I hesitated, then said, "I wouldn't mind if you were home." Their faces did something strange, like a window trying to decide whether to open or stay shut. The following Monday was Parent-Teacher Conference Day, the kind that makes children feel like their lives are being audited. I arrived early because I was class monitor, assigned to stand by the gate and guide parents to the right rooms. Adults streamed in, hair combed, shirts ironed, faces half nervous, half proud. Across the street, under a tree, my mother paced as if the sidewalk were a stage she didn't want to step onto. She took 2 steps forward, 1 step back. She checked her reflection in her phone and grimaced. Her lipstick was softer than usual. Her glitter had been wiped away. She looked for once like someone trying to be invisible. Then a motorbike roared up. My father jumped off, helmet under his arm, hair styled into a ridiculous spiky crest that made him look like an action figure. Mom stared at his hair like it was a personal betrayal. "You came," she said, shocked. Dad shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "If I'm going to be embarrassed, I might as well be embarrassed with you," he muttered. They approached me together, like 2 people walking into a storm without an umbrella. "Hi," I said, and then, because the word felt dangerous and holy at the same time, I added, "Mom, Dad." They reacted a second late, as if their names had been assigned to strangers. Mom's mouth twitched. Dad's ears turned red. Inside the classroom, they sat in my seat by the window. My classmates' parents filled the room with perfume and murmurs. Dad kept his shoulders hunched as if he expected someone to accuse him of something. Mom's foot bounced under the desk like she was ready to sprint. Our homeroom teacher, Ms. Hoa, spoke about exam stress and study habits. Then her tone changed, turning serious as she discussed something the adults suddenly cared about: mental health, trust, bullying that hides behind smiles. She said children who feel safe tell the truth sooner. She said warmth given early becomes a rope a child can grab when the world gets slippery. I watched my parents freeze. Their expressions looked like old doors creaking open on rusty hinges. Dad's jaw tightened. Mom's gaze dropped to the floor. When Ms. Hoa called, "Would the parents of the top student please come forward to share your methods?" My parents stood so fast, their chairs shrieked. They walked to the front like prisoners. Dad looked like he wanted to disappear into a crack in the tiles. Mom's lipstick seemed suddenly too bright. Ms. Hoa handed them a certificate with my name in neat ink. Dad stared at the paper as if it might bite him. Mom whispered, "It's real," with awe and fear mixed together. Dad cleared his throat. "We don't have methods," he admitted. Mom crossed her arms, defensive. "She did it herself," she said. "We didn't even know what she was doing half the time." Ms. Hoa smiled kindly. "Sometimes," she said, "a child does well because she is trying to hold up her world. But I've read Junie's essays. She writes about a home that feels free, not tight. She writes about parents who let her breathe. Don't underestimate what freedom can do." Mom blinked rapidly. Dad's throat bobbed as he swallowed. When they handed me my certificate, their hands shook slightly, as if they were passing me something fragile and alive. On the walk home, they talked nonstop, as if words could build a bridge over years of absence. "Why are you so smart?" Dad demanded, half accusing, half proud. Mom claimed it was her genes. Dad argued it was his. Mom reminded him he couldn't spell definitely. Dad said he could if he wanted to. They bickered like people who were safe enough to be silly. I let their voices wash over me, warm as soup. At home, Mom stared at the sticky note on the fridge that said Rebel. She peeled it off slowly and crumpled it into a small ball. Maybe we don't need to fix her, she muttered. Then, as if that thought was too gentle, she added, but we should still teach her to have fun. My birthday arrived with a bright sky and a nervous feeling, like our apartment had been holding its breath. I picked up the cake from the old pastry shop. The owner told me he was selling the place. New owner tomorrow, he said. Things change. I tried to pay extra. He refused, then softened. Your parents, he said. They were wild. Wild kids survive by being loud. But sometimes, he added, eyes on the door as if he could see my parents through walls. Wild people can learn a quieter bravery. At home. Mom placed the cake in the fridge like it was a secret. Dad disappeared into the bedroom and told me not to go in, which was suspicious because he never cared enough to create rules. Mom glanced at the clock. Your party ends at 8, she said. We'll be around, she added, too casual. One by one, my classmates arrived, shoes left in a messy pile by the entrance. They filled our small living room with laughter and the smell of cheap perfume and fruit soda. My friend Leanne hugged me and said, Your place is cooler than mine. Your parents let you cook? Another friend, Tuan, pointed at the fan Dad had installed last week and said, My dad would never fix things himself. He'd pay someone and complain. My parents stood in the corner like two actors who had forgotten their lines. Mom's hair was tied back. Dad had changed into a clean shirt. They looked alarmingly normal. Then Leanne said brightly, Hello, Auntie. Hello, Uncle. And my parents visibly panicked, as if being called Auntie and Uncle might summon responsibility like a ghost. They nodded awkwardly. Then, to my shock, they started talking. Dad found out that Tuan played the same racing game he did. Within minutes, they were crouched over my old laptop, arguing about controls. Mom's attention was captured by a group of girls fascinated by her makeup bag. She started teaching them how to blend eyeliner, hands surprisingly gentle. The living room became a small festival. Kids laughing, parents trying, all of us pretending we knew what we were doing. For a while, I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe the world can change without breaking. Then one boy said, Auntie, aren't you that streamer? My cousin watches someone who looks like you. The room went quiet in a way that made my skin tighten. Mom's face sharpened. Dad's posture stiffened. Mom forced a smile. No, she said. Lots of people look like me. Another kid, excited, raised his phone. We can search by photo. Mom's hand shot out. She knocked the phone away so fast it felt like a slap. The phone hit the floor with a sharp sound. Everyone froze. The boy's eyes filled with shock. I'm sorry, Mom said too quickly, voice brittle. Sorry. I didn't mean. I picked up the phone, checked the screen, and handed it back with two hands. Sorry, I repeated, bowing my head the way polite kids do when adults make mistakes. It was an accident. My classmates left soon after, the party dissolving like sugar in hot tea. As the door clicked shut behind the last guest, the apartment felt suddenly too large and too quiet. Mom stood still, hands clenched. Dad said, carefully, Are you okay? Mom laughed once, a short sound with no joy. I'm fine, she said, which is what people say when they are not fine. Dad looked at the clock. You're going to stream, he guessed. Mom's chin lifted. Yes, she said. I'm going. I'm not ashamed. But her eyes flicked toward me, and the confidence wobbled. Dad rubbed his face, then said to me, Go to sleep early. He tried to sound casual, but his voice carried a crack like a thin glass. They left. The apartment swallowed their absence. I sat on my bed and stared at the wall, listening to distant motorbike engines and my own heartbeat. At midnight, I couldn't stand it anymore. Dad's phone was on the table, charging. He was terrible at passwords. His password was literally 1,234, because he claimed he had nothing to hide. I told myself I was only going to check if they were safe. I told myself I was a responsible child. I opened the app Mom used. Her account wasn't really hers. It belonged to her and her manager, a woman named Tess, who always smiled too wide. Tess handled messages, arranged collaborations, decided what Mom wore, even decided what Mom should say. Mom called it teamwork. Dad called it being bossed around. The live stream was still running. The screen showed Mom under a dim streetlight, makeup heavy, lips glossy, smile fixed like a sticker. Tess stood closer to the phone, reading comments out loud in a playful voice. "Oh, Big Lion says Mai is the prettiest tonight. Big Lion sent a gift. Clap for Big Lion." Lights flashed across the screen as digital gifs exploded like fireworks. Tess giggled. "Mai, thank him," she instructed. Mom leaned closer. "Thank you," she said softly. "You're kind." A comment popped up. "Take off your jacket." Tess laughed lightly, like it was harmless fun. "Big Lion wants to see your outfit," she sang. "Do it, do it." Mom hesitated, then slowly shrugged off her jacket. The air looked cold. I could see her shoulders goosebump. The comments sped up. More. Spin. Dance. Tess turned toward Mom and murmured something. Mom nodded, smile tightening, and began to dance in the circle of streetlight, movements practiced but small, like she was trying not to take up space. I felt something sharp bloom in my chest. This wasn't glamour. This was someone selling warmth while shivering. Then a new comment appeared. "Car guy is here. Get in." The camera tilted. A sleek car idled at the curb, black paint reflecting streetlight. A man leaned out, face half shadow, grin too easy. Tess's voice went sweet. "Oh, a supporter came to see you in person. Isn't that amazing?" Mom stepped back. "No," she said, still smiling for the camera. "We can talk here." The man laughed. "Don't be shy," he said, and reached for her wrist. The image shook. Mom's smile broke for 1 second, the only honest second I saw. She jerked away. "Stop!" she hissed, but Tess was still laughing, still talking to the chat like everything was entertainment. A golden dog lunged into frame, barking, teeth flashing. The man cursed and stumbled. The dog snapped again, fierce, body trembling, and Mom used the moment to twist free. She ran, dragging the dog by its collar, and the camera spun wildly. Tess screamed. The stream cut off. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. I dialed Dad. Nothing. I dialed again, listening to the ring stretch into silence. I tried Mom. Her line went straight to voicemail. I did the only thing I knew how to do when panic was a flood. I looked for data. The app displayed a location tag for the stream, a feature Tess loved because it made fans feel close. The tag was a pin on a map, on the edge of the city near an unfinished overpass where construction had paused months ago. A place with wide, empty lanes and no witnesses. I grabbed my jacket, my bicycle lock, and my savings jar. I was 12. I was small, but I was also the child of 2 reckless adults. And recklessness, I had learned, is partly inherited. Before I could leave, my phone buzzed. "Dad," finally. His voice sounded breathless. "Junie?" "Mom's in trouble," I said, words tumbling out. She was streaming in a Mantes, a car. I saw it. The location is... Dad didn't let me finish. "Stay home," he ordered, voice sharp like a command he rarely used. "Lock the door. Don't move." "I'm coming," I insisted. "No," Dad snapped. Then his voice cracked. "Please, be my smart kid. Stay." I froze. Dad didn't beg. "Okay," I whispered. But the moment the call ended, I unlocked the door anyway. Because being smart didn't mean being still. I didn't ride all the way. I pedaled to the nearest main road, then stopped at a street cafe where the owner knew me as the kid who bought iced tea and did homework. I asked to borrow a charger and pretended to work on a project while I kept the map open. I texted Dad the pin and typed, "If you can't get there fast, call police." Then deleted the message and typed again, "No, don't call police." Then deleted that too. I didn't know the rules of adult danger. An hour passed. Then another. The iced tea melted. My fingers went numb. Finally, Dad texted, "Found her." Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. Then the next text came, "Hurt. Coming hospital." I ran. At the hospital, Dad lay on a bed with gauze around his head and bruises blooming along his arms. Mom sat beside him, still in makeup, eyes red, hands shaking as she held a paper cup of water. The golden dog lay on the floor near her feet, bandaged, breathing slow. When Mom saw me, she looked both furious and relieved. "Why are you here?" she demanded, voice breaking. Dad tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. "I told you to stay," he muttered. "I didn't," I admitted. "I came close." Mom's hand lifted as if to smack my shoulder, then dropped, trembling. Instead, she grabbed me into a hug so sudden I couldn't breathe. Her arms were tight, desperate. "Don't do that," she whispered. "Don't make me scared like that." I stood stiffly at first, then slowly hugged back, my cheek pressed against her cold collarbone. Later, in fragments between doctors and paperwork, I learned what happened after the stream ended. Tess had arranged the meeting with a man, a supporter, who liked to feel powerful. Tess wanted money, and she wanted to be the one who delivered Mom to it. Mom had sensed something wrong, but she'd stayed anyway because she was tired of being broke and tired of being told she should be grateful for any attention. When the man grabbed her, the dog attacked. Mom ran, and Dad arrived minutes later because one of his old contacts had seen Tess near the overpass and messaged him, thinking it was funny. Dad had driven there with rage like gasoline. He found Mom crouched behind a concrete pillar, dog panting beside her, Tess nowhere in sight. The man came back with 2 friends. Dad fought them with fists and fury and the kind of reckless courage that used to make him a legend. He won and lost at the same time, because a metal bar met his head and the world went white. The man, I learned, wasn't just some random fan. He was connected to Dad's old racing circle, the wealthy thrill seekers who treated people like entertainment. The man's name was Vin, and he laughed as if the world belonged to him. Dad had once fixed Vin's bike for free for the privilege of standing nearby. In the hospital hallway, Dad spoke to Mom in a low voice that I pretended not to hear. "I'm done," he said. "I'm done with them." Mom's laugh was raw. "You should have been done years ago," she replied. Dad nodded, face pale. "I know." When we returned home, the apartment felt different, as if the walls had heard everything and were now trying to be kinder. Dad moved slowly, under doctor's orders, but he still tried to make jokes. Mom stayed home more, her streaming schedule broken. Sometimes she stared at her phone like it was a trap. I watched them circle each other with awkward care. They didn't know how to say gentle things. When Mom cooked soup, she said, "Eat, don't die." When Dad refilled the rice container, he muttered, "You'd better not waste it." When Mom bandaged the dog's paw, she scolded it for being brave. I decided to become their translator. When Mom snapped at Dad for walking too fast, I said, "She's worried about your head." When Dad complained about Mom's phone, I said, "He's scared you'll go back to that place." They glared at me at first, then slowly, grudgingly, they quieted, as if hearing their own hidden feelings spoken aloud embarrassed them into peace. The week after the conference, my parents hovered around me like 2 anxious planets. They tried not to hover, which made it more obvious. Dad waited in the kitchen every morning pretending to check the gas while watching me pack my lunch. Mom sat on the balcony with her phone turned face down, as if the screen might bite her, and asked me random questions that sounded like homework prompts. "If you could live anywhere," she said one evening, stirring instant noodles she claimed were emergency art, "where would you live?" I answered honestly. "Somewhere with a library downstairs," I said, "and a park close enough that I can hear kids shouting, but not close enough that they shout at me." Dad grunted in approval. "Good," he said. "Choose a place with an escape route." Mom rolled her eyes. "Ignore him. He thinks every building needs a getaway plan." Then she paused and added softer, "Do you want us to come to school more?" The question landed like a fragile bowl. If I moved too fast, it might break. "Sometimes," I said, "not for everything, just for the things that matter." Dad tapped his fingers on the table, counting invisible debts. "Define matter," he demanded, but his tone was more nervous than strict. I thought of the hallway filled with parents, of Miss Hoa talking about ropes children can grab. "There's a science showcase next month," I said. "I'm building a tiny solar car. It would be nice if you saw it." Mom pretended to yawn. "Solar car," she repeated, as if the words were too nerdy to be taken seriously. Then she surprised me by asking, "Does it go fast?" "It goes as fast as physics allows," I said. Dad's eyes sparkled. "That's my girl," he declared, and Mom kicked his ankle under the table for claiming me too loudly. In the evenings, Mom tried to cook more, but her pride made her pretend she was doing it for Dad's patient diet, and not because feeding people felt like a way to apologize without speaking. Dad tried to clean more, but he did it aggressively, slamming drawers and muttering about civilization, as if sweeping the floor were a war. I kept translating. I kept smoothing. I kept noticing, with a quiet amazement, that they were not running away. The dog, once the emergency passed, became a presence like a 4th family member. Mom called him Goldie because she refused to think too hard. Dad called him General because the dog stared at everyone like a commander. I called him Comet because he had crashed into our life blazing and bright, and because I wanted to believe he was a sign that the universe sometimes sends help in strange furred shapes. The dog answered to all three names, which felt fitting for our household. One night, a week after the hospital, Mom's phone buzzed with a message from Tess. It was a voice note with cheerful music behind it. Tess said, "My babe, you disappeared. The supporters are asking. Big Lion is angry. We can fix this. Come out tomorrow. I have a new spot. Safer, better lighting. And the guy in the car, he's actually generous if you smile more." Mom listened without moving. When the voice note ended, she stared at the blank screen. Her hands didn't shake this time. That scared me more. Dad, on the sofa, asked, "Is it her?" Mom nodded. Dad's face hardened. "Block her," he said. Mom didn't. She opened a new message and typed slowly, each letter like a stone. I watched from the doorway, heart pounding, and read it upside down in the reflection of the window. "Do not contact me again. What you did was dangerous. If you come near my family, I will report you." She stared at her own words for a long time, then hit send. Her thumb hovered, then she blocked Tess's account with a decisive tap. She exhaled as if she'd been holding her breath for years. Dad stood up too fast and winced. Mom swore at him, and I translated it as concern. Dad swore back, and I translated it as gratitude. Then, in a move that made me nearly drop my water cup, Dad reached for Mom's hand and held it. It wasn't romantic the way movies make it look. It was clumsy, sweaty, human. Mom tried to pull away on instinct, then stopped herself. She let her fingers stay. "I'm sorry," Dad said, voice rough. Mom's laugh came out like a broken bell. "Me too," she answered. And neither of them specified for what, because the list was too long. During Dad's recovery, his father arrived. I had seen my grandfather only in old photos. A stern face, eyes sharp, mouth set like a locked door. He knocked and yelled, "Kai, open up! What nonsense are you doing now?" Mom shoved me into my room like I was a fragile object. "Stay away," she warned. Her voice was tight. "That man, he wanted to sell you when you were a baby. He wanted a grandson, not you." I pressed my ear to the door and listened anyway, because listening was my bad habit. Grandfather barked about family honor, about heirs, about how Dad's younger brother had just had another daughter, and how the sky must be punishing their bloodline. He slammed a bag of medicine onto the table and said it would help produce boys. Dad's voice stayed calm, almost cold. "I got a procedure," he said, after Junie was born. There was a pause like the room had stopped breathing. "You what?" Grandfather roared. Dad spoke quietly. "When Mai gave birth, she suffered for hours. She almost bled out. I watched and I couldn't do anything but hold her hand. I decided then that I would never make her go through that again. If someone had to be responsible, it would be me." Grandfather swore. He called Dad weak. He blamed Mom. He threatened to break things. Dad didn't raise his voice. "Get out," he said. "If you can't see my daughter as enough, you don't get to be in her life." I heard a chair scrape, heard the front door slam, heard Grandpa's footsteps retreat down the stairwell like a storm leaving. Later, Mom sat on the kitchen floor with the dog's head in her lap. Dad leaned against the counter, face tired. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Mom said, very softly, "You didn't tell me you did that." Dad shrugged, eyes on the tiles. "You didn't ask." Mom snorted, "Idiot." But her voice wasn't sharp this time. After break arrived. For once, the three of us were home at the same time for days. It felt unnatural, like a solar eclipse. Dad's old friends texted him jokes about his injury. Vin sent a message through an unknown number. "Next time, stay in your place." Dad deleted it without replying, but his hands shook. Mom stared at her streaming app. Tess sent cheerful voice notes about opportunities and big supporters. Mom didn't answer. I sat at the table and built something on my laptop. A small website, simple and clean, with a banner that said, "Mai's Kitchen and Kai's Fix-It Corner." I didn't tell them I was doing it. I worked at night while they slept, the way I always did when I wanted something too much. On the last night of break, I slid the laptop toward them. "I made you something," I said. Dad frowned. Mom looked suspicious. "Is it homework?" Dad asked, wary. "It's not," I promised. They leaned in. On the screen were 2 schedules. Dad could record short clips teaching simple repairs: how to clean a fan, how to change a light bulb safely, how to fix a squeaky door. Mom could cook cheap meals that tasted good, how to turn wilted vegetables into soup, how to make date cakes without stealing them, how to cook crab without wasting a drop. I had included a tip jar link that didn't require tests. I had included privacy settings. I had included a big red button that said Ian Stream, because I wanted Mom to have power over the ending. Mom's eyes widened. Dad scratched his head, confused. "Why would anyone watch me fix a fan?" he asked. "Because you're funny," I said before I could stop myself, "and because people want to learn, and because it's safer than what you were doing." Mom's jaw tightened, then loosened. "And me?" she asked. "You cook well," I said, "and you're good at talking when you want to be." Dad huffed. "She's scary good at talking," he said, half teasing. Mom glared at him, then looked back at the screen. Her eyes shone. "You did all this for us?" she asked. I shrugged, trying to look casual, but my throat burned. "You said you wanted to teach me how to live," I reminded them. "I thought maybe we could learn together." For a long moment, the apartment was quiet except for the fan humming and the dog snoring. Then Dad reached out and ruffled my hair, gently because of the new dye, and because maybe he was learning gentleness. "Okay," he said. "We'll try it." Mom let out a breath that sounded like surrender and relief mixed together. "Fine," she said, "but if I become famous, you're not allowed to be smug." I failed at not being smug immediately. We launched the first stream 2 weeks later. The set was our kitchen. The lighting was a cheap ring light Dad had bought with the last of his emergency cash. Mom wore minimal makeup. Dad wore a clean shirt. The dog sat like a proud guard near the fridge. At first, no one watched. Mom's smile started to wobble. Dad muttered, "Told you." Then 1 viewer joined. Then 3. Then 10. A woman commented, "I'm a mom too. Thank you for teaching cheap recipes." A boy commented, "My fan is broken. Please help." Someone sent a tiny gift. Not a fireworks explosion, just a small heart. Mom blinked at it as if she'd never seen a gift that didn't come with a demand. "Thank you," she said, voice genuine. "You don't have to send anything. Just be here." Dad showed how to tighten a screw without stripping it. Mom demonstrated how to caramelize sugar without burning it. They teased each other. They argued about seasoning. They laughed. And this time the laughter didn't feel like armor. After the stream, Mom leaned against the counter and said, "That was okay." Dad nodded. "Better than getting hit with a metal bar," he agreed. Mom smacked his arm lightly, then immediately looked guilty. Dad grinned, pain and pride in the same expression. At school, my classmates started talking about my parents differently, not as the wild couple who never showed up, but as the funny repair guy and the cooking lady who made chaos look warm. Ms. Hoa pulled me aside one day and said, "Your parents are trying. Let them." I nodded, and for once I didn't feel like I was holding up the world alone. The science showcase arrived on a Saturday, bright and loud. The school courtyard filled with cardboard posters, plastic models, proud parents holding phones like trophies. My solar car sat on a long table, a tiny chassis with a cheap panel on top, wires taped down neatly, wheels scavenged from an old toy. I had named it Perseverance because I liked long words, and because the car, like me, had been built out of scraps and stubbornness. At first, only my classmates came. Lian squealed and said my car was cute. Tuan asked if it could race his remote control truck. I adjusted the angle of the solar panel and tried not to look toward the gate every 2 seconds. Then Dad appeared, walking carefully but confidently, Comet's leash in hand because Mom insisted the dog would keep Dad from starting fights. Dad wore a polo shirt that looked borrowed from another life. He scanned the courtyard like he expected danger, then spotted me and lifted his chin like a soldier reporting for duty. Mom followed behind, carrying a small container. She had dressed simply, jeans, a plain top, no glitter. In her hand was a box of date cakes she'd baked at home. She looked terrified of being seen. Then she saw me, and her fear shifted into something else. Something that resembled pride but didn't know the shape of the word yet. "You came," I said, and my voice sounded too small for how big the moment felt. Dad grunted. "Of course," he said. "We're here to witness the birth of speed." Mom thrust the cake box into my hands as if giving it away would relieve her nerves. "Eat," she commanded. "Don't faint." When the judges arrived, I demonstrated the car. The sun hit the panel. The wheels spun. Perseverance rolled forward, slow but steady, crossing a strip of chalk like it was crossing a finish line. My classmates clapped. Ms. Hoa smiled. Dad clapped the loudest, startling a few parents. Mom clapped too, smaller, but her eyes were shining. Afterward, while I answered questions about voltage and friction, Dad wandered toward a group of men near the gate. I recognized one immediately from Dad's hospital story. Vin, the wealthy thrill-seeker, who treated people like entertainment. He stood there with his smooth smile and expensive watch, talking to another parent as if he belonged in a school courtyard. Dad's body went rigid. Comet growled low in his throat. Vin saw Dad and lifted his hand in a mocking salute. "Kai," he called, voice friendly as poison. "You're alive." Dad's voice stayed quiet. "Leave," he said. Vin smiled wider. "Relax. I'm just here for my nephew. It's a school. Don't be dramatic." His gaze slid to my solar car. "Cute toy. Does it win you anything?" I opened my mouth, but Dad spoke first. "It wins her a future you can't touch," he said. "And you don't get to stand near it." Vin's smile faltered for a beat. He leaned closer. "You think you're clean now?" he murmured. "You think you're better?" Dad lifted his chin. "Better every day," he replied. "And if you come near my family again, I won't fight you with my fists. I'll fight you with names, dates, and evidence. You like being invisible? I'll make you visible." It was the most terrifying sentence my father had ever said, because it was calm. Vin stared, then laughed as if it was a joke, but the laugh sounded thin. He glanced at Comet's teeth, then took a slow step back. "You've changed," he said, almost offended. Dad shrugged. "You haven't," he answered. "That's your problem." Vin's eyes narrowed. Then he turned away, his shoes too clean for a school courtyard. Mom exhaled hard. She looked at Dad like she was seeing him for the first time. "Names, dates, and evidence," she repeated, half impressed, half stunned. Dad's ears reddened. "Junie taught me," he muttered. "Turns out paperwork is scarier than fists." I smiled, then realized my hands were shaking. Mom took my hand, squeezing once. Dad placed his other hand on top, heavy and warm. Our family hand stack looked ridiculous and felt like a promise. That night, Mom posted a short clip from the science showcase on our new channel. She didn't add music. She didn't add glitter. She simply wrote, "My kid built this. I'm proud." The clip got a handful of likes, then more. People commented encouragement instead of demands. Mom read the words silently, and her face softened, one muscle at a time, like a fist, unclenching. After the comments slowed, Mom looked at me and said, "You know, you can be good at school and still be a little bit trouble." Dad grinned. "A controlled burn," he said. Mom rolled her eyes. "No," she corrected. "A small streak. Something you choose." I didn't answer right away, but the idea settled in my mind like a seed. Near the end of the semester, Dad asked me a question that surprised me. "Junie," he said, scratching the dog behind the ears, "do you want to dye your hair another color? For real this time." I touched my black hair, grown out at the roots. I considered bright red, ocean blue, purple like bruises. I thought of my parents' first panic, their silly project, their clumsy love. "I want a tiny streak," I decided. Not too loud. Just a line of color. Mom's eyes lit up. "Like a secret," she said. Dad grinned. "A quiet rebellion," he declared. We went back to the salon on a Saturday morning. This time, the owner didn't look worried. He looked amused. Mom chose the color, a deep teal like the river at dusk. Dad held the dog's leash. I sat in the chair, cape around my shoulders, and watched my parents in the mirror. They were still wild in their own ways, still sharp-edged, still learning. When the streak of teal appeared in my hair, small but unmistakable, Mom smiled and said,